Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have John Rennie on the podcast. John, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. For those of you who don't know you, if you could give a brief summary of who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I am an entrepreneur. I run a manufacturing business that I started 7 years ago. We make products for electric utilities. So the kind of components that you see on the distribution grid, for example, we sell products all over the country. I started that 7 years ago. Prior to that, I did 22 years in corporate, where I ran 8 different manufacturing businesses for 3 global corporations. And then prior to that, I was a naval officer on nuclear submarines towards the end of the Cold War. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. So I went from military leader to corporate leader to startup entrepreneur. And I also run on the side, I run a podcast called Deep Leadership. And I've written a couple of, actually 3 best-selling leadership books. So yeah, that's
Which
me
are
in a
all on
nutshell.
the wall over there. I got
Yeah, all
got my
surrounding
copy
me.
here
Sure.
of You Have the Watch and just read I Have the Watch. Great
Nice.
book. Really
Yeah.
appreciate the work that you do. Um, you said you were in the Navy. What made you join the Navy?
So I had 2 grandfathers that served in World War II, and I was born and raised in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is kind of a small city north of Boston, and it's a blue collar town, and really nobody leaves Manchester. So you're born there, you raise your family there, you die there, and that my grandparents were born there, my parents were born there, I was born there, and I was that kid that didn't want to be. I wanted to see the world, and my grandfathers gave me a window into what the world looked like and the adventures that they went on. I mean, obviously it was a war, obviously it was a terrible situation, but in my mind as a young child, I was seeing adventure. That my 2 grandfathers went out and went on an adventure. They went all over the world. They did some amazing things, and I said, well, I want to do that too. I want to leave this blue collar town. I want to do something wild. And at the time, well, so I remember my grandfather, who was in the Navy. He was in the North Atlantic during the Battle of the Atlantic, so he was going up against U-boats. And I remember the stories of those German U-boats, and I thought to myself, wow, I mean, how can you defeat an undersea weapon platform like that? It's just crazy. And so I became fascinated with with submarines at an early age, and I read a lot of the stories of the U.S. submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet and all that they did to hold the line after we lost the Navy in Pearl Harbor. So they held the line until we could build up the fleet again. And so I was fascinated with those stories, fascinated with the heroics of those submarine commanders, and I said that's what I want to do. I want to, and so at a young age. So you know how kids want to be an astronaut, they want to be a firefighter, police officer. I wanted to be an officer on a nuclear submarine at a very
So
young
you knew
age.
that, and a young officer
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah, very
Yeah.
specifically. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be one of those commanding officers, one of those daring captains, and doing, and of course the Cold War was on and the Soviets were the evil empire, and I wanted to be part of that. And the submarines played a big part in that Cold War standoff. And so I'm like, I want to be there on the front lines with those submarines and doing that kind of cat and mouse stuff that was happening, and you're reading about, hearing stories about. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. But, but then it's like, how does a kid from Manchester and Hampshire get to the fleet, get to these submarines, become an officer? I remember going to my guidance counselor freshman year in high school, and I'm like, I want to be a submarine officer. And they're like, what? Like, what is that? Like, I'm like, what do I need to do to become a submarine officer? Like, they had no idea. I'm the first kid that ever asked that question. And to their credit, they did the research. They said, well, look, you need to be really good in math and science in high school, and then you've got to go into a great engineering school to be able to get a chance to get into the fleet, because all submarine officers have to be nuclear engineered qualified. You have to become a nuclear engineer to be a submarine officer. So A, I don't know anything about engineering. B, no one from my family's ever gone to college. C, I don't even know what nuclear engineering is or mechanical engineering, any of that stuff. So I had to figure it out. Like, I'm coming from a blue collar world where my father and my grandfathers were all blue collar workers, and I was trying to figure out how to become this engineer in on these nuclear submarines. So it was something that it was just a bridge. It's a bridge too far. It shouldn't have happened. I should have been the person that did it, but I was just a persistent kid, and I wasn't going to give up on my dreams. And I think a lot of my stories, things I talk about in my books, was that idea of just grit, just that perseverance through whatever trials came in front of me. I was determined that I was going to get to the boats. I was going to be a naval officer, and I was going to do whatever it took to get there. And that meant trying to figure out how to get good grades in math and science, right? Which is hard. It wasn't necessarily my natural fit. And then getting into a good engineering school. And then, I remember freshman year, I get into college, or I get into a good engineering school. I went to Worcester Polytech in Worcester, Mass. And my freshman year, I show up, and my professor for calculus is a guy named Dean Van Alstyne. He actually worked with Einstein earlier in his career. Like, he looked like Einstein, had the wild hair. He was just the crazy, like the professor jacket with the patches on it. He would just fill the board with equations. And I remember thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I don't belong here. I don't even no idea what's happening. I'm never going to make it. But it was just like, okay, well, I've got to get through this, and I got to get through physics. I got to get through, differential equations, and just like one step at a time, I crawled and climbed my way to get to the fleet. And then I remember my junior year, you can actually go interview to get into the submarine force. You actually have to fly in uniform to Washington, D.C., and interview with the admiral, the nuclear power admiral, and he has to approve you for submarine duty. And I remember, again, thinking, there's no way I'm getting in. I mean, I'm just some kid from New Hampshire, blue collar kid from New Hampshire. There's no way I'm getting into this thing. And sure enough, they I got in, got accepted, and I made it to the fleet. I had to go through. So once I graduated college, I have to go through a year and 3 months of training. So 6 months was at nuclear power school down in Orlando, Florida. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. 6 months at an actual working nuclear reactor, and then I had to spend 3 months at
What
submarine
made
school.
that the hardest in your life?
So for me, here's the deal. So again, I guess I faced imposter syndrome a lot in my life, right? So like, I shouldn't be here. I don't belong here. These are, so when I showed up at nuclear power school, it was the best and the brightest minds from the country, the best engineers in the entire US were there. There were kids from Stanford, MIT, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, like the top engineering schools. I went to a small engineering school. I did okay, but these were the best and the brightest. And I thought, there's no way I belong here. There's no way I can compete with these guys. My skills were always like hands-on. If you gave me something I could fix, I could see, I could understand it. But nuclear engineering and studying nuclear power, there's none of that. It's all like equations and chemical equations, which still to this day don't make sense to me, right? But you're just trying to figure these things out, and here these, my peers all seemed to like get it, and I didn't get it. So I had to work my ass off to get through that school. It's the hardest thing I ever did, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of all the things I've done in my life. Getting through that 6 months of nuclear power school is still one of the things that I think there's no way I should have made it. Now get this, my roommate at nuclear power school was my roommate in college, right? He studied nuclear engineering. I studied mechanical engineering. So he was an expert in nuclear engineering. He graduated from college with a 4.0 average. He was the smartest guy, still to this day, the smartest guy I know. And he failed out of nuclear power school. So he's the guy that should have made it. I'm the guy that did make it. And again, it wasn't that I was smarter than him. He was 10 times smarter than me, but it was just this persistent and this idea that I wasn't going to quit no matter what. And I was going to get to my goal, which was to get to the fleet, get to the boats. So I think a lot of my story, and I write a lot about this in my second book, All in the Same Boat, is that story of perseverance and just like not quitting and doing whatever it takes to get to your goals, and no matter what obstacle comes in your way.
For those listening, what are the differences between 3 books?
Oh yeah. So the first book is called I Have the Watch, and it's 22 short stories of leadership stories that took place in my life. So they're either in the Navy, they're in some of the manufacturing businesses that I've turned around during my career. So they're 22 short stories, each with a different leadership lesson in it. So it's easy to read. It's less than 100. It's less than 200 pages. So some people finish it in like 3 hours. So it's a simple book, easy to read, very popular. It's my #1 best-selling book that I've done, and even today it sells. This morning I think I was like sold a bunch of copies this morning while I was like working out. I'm like, oh,
Awesome.
this still sells today. It's a great book. But then the second book is called All in the Same Boat, and that's the book I really wanted to tell, and that's really my life's journey, my leadership life's journey, and the deep lessons I learned. And critics for my first book said we wanted to hear more sea stories. Well, the second book it's mostly sea stories. Like every chapter is just filled with 5 or 6 different stories of things that happened on the boat. So if you're interested in submarine life and what is that like, you're going to see it all like rolled out in this book. So it's kind of a fun book, a lot of sea stories in it. And then I usually I weave in a couple of business stories too to show you that these ideas that I learned in the Navy kind of apply to business as well. And then You Have the Watch, the last book, is really a guided journal. It's more meant to be something that's a companion for you. Like you basically have it on your desk for a year, and there's 50 themes in the book, and each week you reflect on a different facet of that theme. So it's meant to be with you over a longer period of time. So there are 3 different types of books. The first one's shorter, second one's a little bit longer with some deep sea stories in it, and then the last book is more of a interactive leadership guide for a new leader, a young leader, a leader taking on a new role. It's perfect for that.
Yeah, and I have the watch. Definitely want to get into, like, I wanted to, it's so funny. That's actually the next question that I had for you was what is life like on the submarine? I'm definitely interested in getting in all in the same boat, because I would love to hear more about it. But for people listening, because like my familiarity with it is like U-571 and
Yeah, yeah,
Crimson Tide, right?
yeah.
So what is life like on a submarine? And what was like your experience when you first went down, like, the first time? What was that like?
Yeah, so life on a submarine is like it's a little bit like life at work. For those people that may work in an office environment, you go into work every day but you go home. So here it's like you go to work and then they just lock the doors for 110 days, right? So you don't go home. So it's just like work, but it's, you can't go home at the end of the day. So it's a 24/7 kind of immersion in work. And it's as a leader, it's actually an interesting dilemma because you can't go home after a hard day. You can't kick your feet up and have a beer on a Friday night after a long week. You're in it, nonstop for 3 months straight. So it's intense. You are dealing with, obviously weapons of mass destruction in a big way, right? We had 24 nuclear weapons on board. We had a nuclear reactor. We were operating, underneath the surface of the ocean, and we operated alone. So we had no backup, no support. So we had to have each other's back. We lived or died by our sailors next to us. So it was really important that we had qualified sailors everywhere because our lives depended on each other. So we had to watch each other. We had each other's back because we were pretty much alone in the Atlantic Ocean. And when you think about it, with 24 nuclear weapons, a nuclear reactor, and a bunch of 19-year-olds, it's pretty wild. Like now that I think about it as an adult, like I'm in my 50s now, I'm like, I can't believe they let me do that. It's wild. But I can tell you this, it's overwhelming. I remember when I first showed up to the boat, we were getting ready to go to sea. I showed up probably, it must have been 2 or 3 weeks before we were getting ready to go on deployment. I came around the corner. The Tennessee was in dry dock, and that meant she was out of the water, and she was in this large covered dry dock, one of the largest buildings, by the way, in the United States. And I came around. I had my sea bag on my shoulder. I came around the corner, and there I saw the Tennessee out of the water, like hundreds of like dock workers working on it. There's sparks, there's noises, there's people yelling, there's alarms going off, and I'm just like, the hell? Like, like I thought I was ready for this, and when I got there, I was like, and we're talking. It took me 10 years to get to the boat. I mean,
Yeah.
it took a lot of effort to get there. And when I got there, I thought, well, I was ready until I turned around and saw that boat. And I was, there's no way I'm ready to get. There's no way they are putting me in charge of a department on this submarine. I don't even know where the bathrooms are. I don't know anything. So it is definitely overwhelming. The sights, the smells, the sounds. It's so foreign. When you deploy, you take what you have, and that's what you're going to have for 3 months, and then they lock the hatches. They literally lock you inside like you're on the International Space Station. You are not going anywhere. And so you deploy with the people around you, people you don't like, people you like. officers you can't stand, officers you love. You're out there with them all, and you're not going to get any replacements. This is the crew you deploy with. This is the crew you're going to return from sea with, and yeah, it's a very interesting work environment because you're in these really tight spaces. You don't have a lot of personal space. You don't have a lot of personal liberty. You are in it 24/7, and you really get to know your fellow sailors. You get to have deep, deep relationships with everyone around you because you are in this really unique, submerged world. It's hard to explain. And so, for me at least, getting out when I got out of the Navy and I started leadership in the civilian world, I wanted to get to know everybody. I'm like, tell me about you. Where'd you grow up? Like, how many brothers and sisters you have? And like, they're like, you're my boss. Why are you asking all these questions? I'm like, well, that's just what we do, right? Like that was just normal to me to get to know the people that work for you, like deeply. I would spend these 6-hour watches in the engine room. I would be engineering officer of the watch. I mean, I was the officer in charge of the nuclear reactor at sea while we're under, and we would stand these watches in this room called maneuvering, and that's where we control the reactor from. So you had an officer, that would have been me, engineering officer of the watch. I'd have a throttleman, I had a reactor operator, and I had an electrical operator, and we would stand 6-hour watches. 6 hours, and nothing would happen. Like the mid watch, nothing would happen. So 6 hours looking at gauges for 6 hours, and guess what? The tales would go, the stories would go, the stories of ex girlfriends, the stories of addictions, the stories of you're not going to believe this story, and stories of just exploits, and it just the craziest stories you would ever hear. And it's because we were trying to keep each other entertained on these long 6-hour watches. So we knew everything about each other. I mean, details that you wouldn't believe that we would know. And so I think that that was a really neat way to do leadership because you really knew the people around you. You knew how they ticked. You knew what motivated them. You knew things that frustrated them. So we really got to know each other. And it was an all male crew. So back then there was no women on board. So it was this tight brotherhood of sailors that we deployed with. And I did that 7 times, made 7 deployments, and so I spent nearly 2 years of my life underwater, and so having those those really unique experiences. So yeah, it was a solid foundation certainly for leadership in the real world, having those very unique experiences and those tight confines, you
Yeah.
know.
That's the key word I think about when I think about you, based on the little interaction. This is the first time we're really speaking. Um, but when I think of you, I think about leadership. And you mentioned in your book that the single most important lesson that you've learned is that leadership matters. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think even Jocko has said it. There's no such thing as bad teams, only bad leaders. And he tells the
Mm,
story in one of his books about how, like, the worst raft in his platoon, or what do you call it, his SEAL class, became the best because they changed out who the boat leader was, and it was the same people, but they were led differently. And I do believe that leadership matters. It does make a difference, and a good leader is going to bring out the best in everyone, and they're going to be focused on getting things done and also taking care of the people around them. And so I've seen great leaders accomplish amazing things, and I've seen bad leaders tear apart teams. So there's a lot of variety in leaders. I mean, you've got all sorts of types. When I did, like I said, 22 years in corporate, I saw all sorts of different leaders.
what would you say would be the main difference between a good leader and a bad leader in your experience?
Well,
I
I
mean, it's
think I
hard to
think
put into one thing, but
yeah, no, I really do believe that leadership there's three things. It's about motivating people to get something done, right? So it's motivation, is people, and a goal, getting something done. Those three things, and I think a lot of leaders lose sight on those three things. So the best leaders say, "Hey, it's the people and the mission, right? So I got to accomplish the mission through people. So I'm going to take care of my people. We're going to get the mission done, right? And that's something that's where I learned in the Navy, right? Get the mission done, get everybody home safe. That's what we did. So the best leaders are thinking about that. How do I motivate people to get things done, to help achieve our goals? They're thinking about that every day. All right. Now, the leaders that are not are the ones that are thinking, I got to get my emails done. I got to get my to-do list done. I'm going to go get in a meeting. Or they'll say, well, I don't have time for you. I'm too busy. You've got the busy managers that are so busy they don't know what's happening with their team. You've got the absent managers who are involved with everything except spending time with their team. You've got the micromanagers who are way too involved that are trying to control every aspect of their team. So it's and then you have people that don't care at all. And I saw a lot of this as well. So people went into management to get a promotion, to get more money, to get the corner office, to get the big paycheck and the big bonus and the title. And they had no interest in caring for people and getting things done. They just wanted the perks of the job. They didn't want to work for it. Like one of the things that always bothers me when I hear that expression, dress for the job you want. I hate that. Because I saw a lot of leaders in corporate that were always trying to get to the next job. They never were doing the job that they were given. They're thinking like, oh, what do I need to do to get to that next job? And I always say, shut your mouth and do your job. Do the job that you've been asked to do. You've been asked to be a leader in this area. Maybe it's not the exact job you want, but do your best in that job. Don't stop spending time thinking about your future. What job you want next. Do the job that you've been assigned very well, and you're going to get more opportunities to do more. And I think that's what I see in great leaders is they do the job that they've been asked to do very well. And then they're not looking to the next thing. My wife said that she said throughout your career you've been dragged kicking in the street, screaming up the corporate ladder, and that's what happened to me. I went very far up. I was a vice president, general manager for years, but it was always because my teams did better than everybody else. We outperformed our the other factories in our division. We always did, and it wasn't me. It was that I figured out a way to take that collective wisdom of a team and bring it to the forefront and learn from the people around there and get the best out of them and get the best out of the businesses. But it was always about getting the most out of the teams. And our businesses always outperformed my peers, but it wasn't really me. It was my team, and I unlocked their potential, and that's really the only secret that I had in what I did in turning around some of these struggling factories was just getting the people involved, getting them excited, getting them motivated, and towards turning the business around. And we always did it, and I kept getting promoted, I kept getting more and more factories, and so if you do your own job really well, there's likely you're going to get more responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's explained very well with the triangle that you have in your book, and prioritizing people and mission is
Yeah,
it's really huge. And I think, the money comes from that. The promotions come from that. You can focus on promotions and getting money and you might get it, but you're not going to be a good leader. And I completely agree with, your what you said on that. Um, you also say find out who the naysayers are and who are the cheerleaders. How does one distinguish between the naysayers and those who provide constructive criticism? Because, sometimes people are,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can say, oh, they're just a naysayer, but they're actually giving good feedback that you interpret, negatively.
Yeah, so I think that's really important. We in the leadership world have a strange observation about complainers. A lot of leaders don't like complainers. Complainers are like, oh, this guy's always complaining. But what I found throughout the years is that a lot of times your complainers care deeply about the business and they want to see it succeed. Their message maybe the way the way their message comes out might sound like just complaining, but a lot of times they do care. So it's important that we listen to those voices of complainers. But when I'm talking about naysayers, I'm talking about when you're doing a change effort. So when you're like, for example, a lot of the plants that I ran, I was implementing lean manufacturing in Six Sigma. And so you would have some people, the naysayers, the ones that, oh, this will never work. We've tried this for years and it never worked. Oh, this is never going to work. That's a naysayer. The complainers or the constructive criticism would be like, we tried it before and this is where it failed, and we need to watch out for X, Y, or Z. Then you're like, okay, I'm listening. What are you saying? So I think that's the difference is that I think that people that are given constructive criticism and even maybe be complaining is they want to see the best outcome. So they're doing it for the best reasons. Naysayers a lot of times are just trying to stall efforts for whatever reason. Change is hard. People don't like change, and so everybody deals with it differently. Naysayers are the ones that are trying to stall it by throwing out as many roadblocks as possible. So that's what. And cheerleaders are those are the great people. Those are the people that are like, okay, we're going to do lean. Okay, let's see what that's all about. Oh, hey, John, I read up on lean, and this is what this other company that's in our industry did on lean, and let's take a look at what they did. So they get on board early, and those are great people to find because they help accelerate the change effort for sure.
Yeah. Um, you also speak on LMX theory. I was looking at your blog.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is for listeners?
Oh my gosh, it's the most geeky leadership thing ever. I can't believe you found that. So yeah, so I'm right now I'm studying for my doctorate in leadership, and so I decided to post some of the reports I've been writing on my website, just for anyone who just wants to geek out on some really deep leadership things. And so LMX theory is actually what's called leader member exchange theory, and the theory is that a leader given and has a group of people, and he will have different relationships with each of those people. And there's the way the theory goes is there's an in crowd and an out crowd. The in crowd are the ones that the leader has a deep relationship with, and those they tend to listen to those employees more. They give them more opportunities to lead projects and to grow. Whereas there are other employees that just have a business relationship with the leader. So I do my job and I get paid. So LMX theory is that the leader has limited resources, and so he can only spend those limited resources with a certain amount of people, and that some are treated better than others based on that limited resource. That's the theory. But if you read through that whole paper, I argue that that's a bunch of BS. So here I am. I'm a 30-year practitioner studying the academic side of it. So this is an interesting thing. So I'm coming here going, what are you talking about? And the reason why they say that you have limited resources, because in LMX theory, it says you have too many people reporting to you, and that's why you have limited resources. Well, there's a problem there in the beginning. So you never have that many people reporting to you. So as a great leadership, your span of control, you want to keep it small. So whenever I'm setting up an organization, I make sure you only have 6 to 10 direct reports, so that you can really manage those direct reports, and so you don't have that differential relationship with your people. So I call LMX theory a bunch of bogus, and I do in that paper, but I do it in a very academic way to get a good grade. But I do believe it's bogus, and I think it's if you reduce the span of control to 6 to 10 people, then you can properly manage that team without having unfavorability towards certain groups.
Yeah,
That's a really geeky question. I can't believe you asked me that.
well, also, I mean, branching off that a little bit, I mean, I think a good leader knows how to delegate authority, and a poor leader wants as much authority as possible. Would you agree with that? Is that because a lot of bosses, they want that sense of that control,
Yeah.
whereas a leader knows how to give it away in a sense. I'm not say give it away, but knows how to balance that. Like in the idea that you're in the center of the triangle.
Yeah. Yeah.
You spoke about like when I think forgot exactly when, but you were saying that when you first, I forgot exactly, you were working with people who were all older than you and knew more about the
Oh yeah.
business
Yeah.
than you. How did how does someone who, and you mentioned imposter syndrome, which, I've dealt with myself and a lot of other
Yeah.
people will deal with. How do you manage that where it's just like you're the guy, like everyone knows more than you, but you're the boss. So how do you navigate those two things?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question. Yeah, it's interesting. When I first showed up to the boat, I told you the story of me, she's seeing the boat for the first time. What I didn't tell you is that after I got a quick tour of the ship, they introduced me to my department. I had the reactor controls department working for me. And so that was about a team, about 8 people with a chief petty officer. And I remember meeting the team and introducing myself, and like all of the sailors had made multiple deployments. They were all qualified. They were all skilled in their craft, and my chief petty officer had been in the Navy about as many years as I've been alive. So my first leadership job in the Navy was that situation. Like, I had to lead people who were older and more experienced than me. And that's one of the toughest things that a leader has to do. And a lot of young, I speak to graduate students. I speak to a number of different universities, grad students, about leadership. And that's one thing I talk about, is because that they're going to find themselves in that situation where they're young and they've got a more experienced team working for them. So how do you lead in that situation? Well, there's a lot of things, but one of it is humility. So just being humble and being willing to listen, being willing to listen, observe, be present, see the challenges that your team is facing. Defer to your experienced people, ask them questions, and shut your mouth and listen to their answers. But then there's and well, the next thing you do is you want to become wherever you're weak, you want to become strong in. You want to learn as quickly as you can to show the team that you are progressing in your knowledge of what they do. But then the third thing is that you are the leader, and there are certain things that only you can do, and you want to make sure you do that. So for my example, I was a very young officer, had a very experienced team. So one of the things I had to do is make sure that they were taken care of, that I made sure that I represented them well with the engineering officer, with the executive officer, with the commanding officer. I want to make sure that they had the parts they need. They had the pay was right, that they had the time off that they needed, that they were getting, that the watch bill was set up. So I made sure I took care of my team. I didn't know anything about nuclear instrumentation like they did, but I knew them as people and I took care of them. And so I earned their respect over time by they saw that I listened, and I cared, and I was learning. I was coming up to speed quickly. And the third thing is I looked out for them and I did the leader's job, even though I was young and inexperienced. So you can do those things as a young leader, if you focus on those things and don't be intimidated by the fact that you don't know as much as the team around you. You have a job to do. Someone found fit that you should lead this team, so you've got to lead the team. And I think that if you do those things, you can make an impact. And I did, but I certainly didn't come in and say, I'm the boss now, this is the way we're
Yeah.
going to do it. Because they would have laughed at me.
Yeah.
Right. So absolutely. Yeah, so that's a little bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going through your blog, I really just like the titles, and that gave me a couple of questions. Just because I think about, for me, I mean, even making this podcast, right? You say, I am not smart, I am persistent. Well, I would argue you are smart and you are persistent. Um, what message would you say to people who share that same? I really want to eh, focus in on that, because that's a message I keep hearing. A lot of guests that I speak with, it's persistence, but you don't have to know it all. And that doubting myself. There's so many times I doubt myself. I'm like, no, keep going, keep going. And the willingness to make mistakes. Maybe if you could just share, your experience in being persistent and times of doubt, and how people can keep pushing
Yeah.
through even when they doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I just tell you a quick story. I was looking at some statistics on my website this morning. Not this morning, yet. This weekend. Sorry, this weekend. And I started my website in 2014, so 9 years ago, and I wrote 16 articles in 2014. And I had a grand total of 669 visitors to my website in all of 2014. Well, in the first half of January this year, I've had more than 2,500 visitors to my website. So I've had more visitors in half a month than I had in my whole first year of starting a blog and starting to write about leadership issues. And every year you see a steady progression. So 9 years in, you're seeing just like exponential growth of the people that follow me, read my stuff. But we often give up at the 2 year mark, at the 3 year mark, right? We don't stay for 9 years doing the same thing, just being focused, being disciplined, being persistent, focusing on a goal and not giving up on that goal. And to the people who don't give up, you end up accomplishing amazing things. And I think Angela Duckworth is one of my favorite authors. She wrote a book called Grit, and she defines grit as passion and persistence for long-term goals. And what she's saying is that there are people who have grit, and that's what I think I'd have, where they set themselves a long-term goal and they will not give up no matter what comes their way. They're going to keep persisting until they achieve that goal. And so they have that fortitude of like that persistence, that no matter what happens, no matter how flat they fall on their face, they're going to keep going because that goal is so important. And certainly for me, going from, a kid who wanted to be on a submarine officer to a decade later being a submarine officer, that's grit. 10 years of hard work to get there. That's what it takes. So same thing, in my I want to call it my online journey, right? No one went to my website, like I remember a friend of mine found a t-shirt. He was going to buy it for me. He said, more people have read this t-shirt than have read your blog. I'm like, screw you, man. Right. But it's true. Like, no, I was writing to an audience of one at the time. Right. But guess what? A lot of the stories I wrote in those early years became part of my first book. So I learned my craft. I learned how to write. I learned, I gained experience, right? Even in the dark, right? When nobody was paying attention, I practiced my craft. I got better at it. And a lot of those stories became my first book. So you don't lose when you're operating in the darkness and no one knows who you are, and you feel like there's no hope in sight. You're learning skills that are going to be valuable in your journey. So yeah, just don't give up. And when you don't give up, it's like the New Year's resolution thing. It always cracks me up. I'm not a New Year's resolution guy. I mean, I think maybe 11 years ago I started weightlifting, and like, okay, I'm going to weightlift this year, and it's like I've been doing it every year since. So it's like you just do it. And I've never been one of those guys that have to get motivated for something. I set my mind to it, and then you establish the habits to be able to maintain that and keep that and do it. People say to me, well, how do you get up at 4 a.m? It's like I set my alarm and I get up at 4 a.m. It's not hard. Like I don't that look, oh, I can never do that. Yeah, you can. You literally can.
Yeah.
I'm not special. I get up at 4 a.m. every morning, right? And I spend my morning writing, right? And then I spend my morning working out, right? So I'm spending my time, developing my mind, developing my body, and then I'm ready to go to work, So I'm working hard. I'm working before the sun comes up, before my peers get up, And if you want to be successful, if you want to get anything done, you've got to be willing to put in the hours, put in the work, and you got to do it over a long period of time. It's not something that happens overnight. I hate when I see like the Instagram post that say, shows a picture of a guy with like a private jet and a fancy car, and it says hustle. I'm like, hustle my butt. I've been hustling my entire life. Don't give me that.
Yeah.
And so people think that all you have to do is just hustle, and in a year you'll have a private jet. That's not the way it works. That's not the way life works. But if you can do that effort, work hard, and when nobody's noticing, you're going to develop a lot of different skills that are going to be valuable in your life. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
I think
yeah,
that's key what you just said there, when no one's noticing. I mean, for
yeah,
the younger, weaker version of me, was, oh, it's putting on a show. And years ago, I'd be like, what is he talking about? New Year's resolutions are what it's all about. And I look back at that, and I completely agree with you now, because it's it's this false idea of motivation. It's funny you bring up Jocko. I feel like there's these two types of motivation. There's motivation where it's just about, it's all feelings, and then feelings come,
mm,
feelings go. But Jocko had a really great definition of it. It's to break down that word. It's to have motive. It's similar to what you're talking about with leadership. It's to have that mission. Once you have that motive, where you have your mission, you can't help but get out of bed in the morning and write. And you're helping
yeah.
people. You're helping people become strong leaders. That mission in itself must be driving you every single day.
Oh,
Because as you
yeah.
said, we have a crisis of leadership in America. So that in itself is a problem, a noble problem to be solved.
Absolutely. I mean, my mission is to build a world with better bosses. That's it. That's 100% it. That's what I do. What I do. That's why I write books. That's why I run my podcast. It's to do that thing. It's to give back after 3 decades of doing this and learning all these and gaining all these experiences, to sort of give back. And I'm getting an opportunity to do that, and I absolutely love it. That my audience is getting bigger. And I operated in darkness for a long time, and now my audience is there, and my skills are there, and it's great. Like i I wasn't ready for the audience in the beginning. I am ready now.
Yeah.
So when you're struggling and you're working on something, you're like, oh, nobody cares, nobody's listening. It's like, well, maybe you need to develop a few skills before someone's going to listen.
Yeah.
Maybe It's okay that no one's hearing your message yet. But if you keep practicing, you're going to get better at your craft, and then you're gonna find your voice. It took me a while to find my voice as a writer. It took me a while to find my voice as a podcaster. But once you find your voice, then okay, and then people are like, "Oh, we love you." You're like, "Yeah, well, you don't know I've been doing this." I was just watching. This is gonna age me. I was watching the story of early Van Halen. Van Halen's my favorite band, right? I grew up with Van Halen. To me, 1978 to 84, Van Halen, best band ever existed in the history of Earth. Okay, watching this morning or this afternoon on the treadmill, I'm watching the story of early Van Halen. They played nonstop for years at like at parties, local parties, clubs, just the worst venues. And they learned their craft when nobody was noticing. They
Mm,
practiced their craft. And then until a guy named Gene Simmons from Kiss happened to just see them one day, like, holy cow, these guys are amazing, right? They they practiced their craft in darkness until they were ready to come out of that darkness, and they were ready, and of course they blew up from there. But my point is that that's that story. You just get better and better. The Beatles, the story of the Beatles are the same thing. They went over to Germany, and they played in bars until they played every day for 6 hours a day, and they built a connection, and they built a sound. They found their voice. They came back to England and just blew up, right? But they had done the work. They had the practice when nobody was listening. It's really
yeah.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I resonate with that. I mean, finding your voice. I mean, that's why I started this podcast in 2021. And I mentioned before the call, I started this because I saw how much, I mean, on a small scale, how much family and friends were divided, and on a
Mm,
political scale, massive division. And I'm like, I can complain about it and be that person on the sidelines,
yeah.
or I can get involved. And great, now I'm held accountable for what I say, and I have to formulate how I say things and when I say it and how I say it. So, you said in one of your blogs, and I won't get too deep into this for the sake of this podcast, but you said something that was very profound to me and really resonated with me. And you said, instead of compliance, mandates create defiance. What did you mean
Mm.
by that?
Yeah, so when a lot of this stuff was coming down with COVID, and you were seeing a lot of like, you must wear a mask, you must do this, you must do that, a lot of musts, right? Including when vaccines came out and all that sort of stuff. So but what here again, I try not to, what I do, try not to get too political. In fact, I unplugged from the whole political scene during the Hillary Trump campaign. At that point, I
Yeah,
was like, the world has gone crazy. I'm unplugging. And it was the best thing I ever did, by the way,
yeah,
because I was one of those guys that was like a political junkie. And I was like, I need to unplug because just for my sanity. And that was a good thing I did. But as I observed what was happening and what the leaders were trying to do in the country, right? They were doing the kind of things I saw bad leaders do in business, where they're like, you must wear your seatbelt on a forklift, right? And we will write you up if you don't get it. And what did people do? They're like, screw you, I'm not wearing the seat. I just saw it. Like when you would mandate something, people just say, well, I'm just going to defy your rule, right? But when they understand, or they believe in the reason, if you inspire them, you're like, like for example, when I safety issue, right? Seatbelts on a forklift. Why do you wear them? Well, if the forklift falls over for any reason, you stay inside the frame. You don't launch outside where you're going to get crushed by the forklift or whatever falls over, right? So we want you locked into that cage, right? So you don't fall out. So when I see somebody without a seatbelt on the forklift, when I'm walking through the shop, manufacturing shop floor, I'll say, "Hey man, you're not wearing a seatbelt." They're like, well, yeah, it's too hard. Or it's like, look, I want you to wear the seatbelt because I care about you, and I don't want to see you get hurt. Right? I want you to go home the same way you came in. And that's different from, where the hell's your seatbelt? I'm writing you up, right? It's a whole different mindset. When you inspire, right, people are willing to follow because they believe that it's the right message. Like, okay, I believe that this is right for that reason. When you mandate, all you're going to get is people who are going to try to defy your rules. And so it's the same thing with raising a child. You say, I'm the dad, and that's why. Well, you're not going to get
yeah,
anywhere.
correct.
You say, I don't want you to put your hand on that hot stove because you're going to get burned and it's going to leave a scar, and I don't want you to have a scar. That's the reason for it. So I think when what I was seeing through this whole thing was this: I'm the boss, I'm the dad, I'm the CDC, I'm the president, you listen to me, and what does it do? Well, there's a group of people that are going to say, screw you, right?
Yeah.
And that's just natural human behavior that I've seen time and time again.
Yeah,
So
because
that's where that comes from.
on the bigger picture, what I saw is really both sides were right. You know, in one sense, you had one side was concerned about health, and the other side is concerned about authoritarianism. I mean, this is America, right? It's
Yeah.
the idea that we come to our own conclusions, we walk our own path, and you trust in the people, the will of the people. And I think as a country, we've been asleep for a long time. And, as you said, according to Gallup, 70% of employees are disengaged at work, and half of US employees are actually seeking for a new
Yeah.
job, right? Uh, Clearly, there is a leadership crisis. And I think more people on the sidelines should enter the arena. I just did a video on the man in the arena quote. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I could sit here and complain about problems, or I can get involved.
Yeah.
So
I've always been that man. I've always been in the trenches. And you know, and I think that's we need more people in the trenches that are willing, that care and want to see the best. I turned around a lot of businesses in my career, but I didn't do it for a corporate. I didn't do it for myself. I did it for the hourly worker. I did it because my parents and grandparents were hourly workers, and I did it for them. I wanted to make sure that the companies that I ran would be open and be available for people to have a long career in. And that meant being successful. We had to grow our top line or bottom line, we had to be successful. But I was doing it because I cared about the people that work for me. I wanted to create safe jobs, well-paying jobs that were going to be there over the long term. And so that's what motivated me. It wasn't to try to get big paychecks. It wasn't to try to get, a fancy title or a big bonus check. Some of those things came, but that's not why I did it. I did it because I cared about the people and I wanted to create a good working environment. And and that's another thing too. I see a lot in politics that's frustrating, is that people do it for ulterior motives. They're not doing it for the country. They're not doing it for the people. It's there's always seems like there's something behind the curtain, right? You're like, oh shoot, and you peek, and we've gotten to see behind the curtain a lot in
yeah,
the past 3 or 4 years, and it's, you know, and again, it's shaken our faith in a lot of really big institutions in this country, and it's frustrating to me as an older, an American. I'm a military veteran. I serve my country. I deeply love this country, but to see the CDC the way it is, and you're like, holy cow,
yeah,
the relationship with pharmaceuticals. You see the CIA and some of the things that they did, and some of the things that are coming out now, even about like past presidents and maybe the Kennedy
yeah,
assassination. You're like, holy cow. And then the FBI and some of the things that are happening with spying on presidents and what have you. And you're just like, wait a second, these are like the institutions I put my faith in for my entire life now. Or you're opening up these and you're seeing like, wow, there's nothing there. It's always been bad. Politicians have always been bad, right? We know that they're deceitful, and they're just trying to get votes, and they don't care about you. We know that. But to see some of these institutions, FBI, CIA, CDC, be kind of uncovered for who they are, it's just that bothers me as a an American veteran, a patriot, or whatever. I just like, wow, I don't want those. And I've had on my show, I've had former FBI guys, I've had former CIA guys, I've had every branch of the military, and yeah, and those guys are not happy with some of the stuff that's coming out. So I
yeah.
talked to a lot of Afghanistan vets after our pull out of Afghanistan. Is people are really upset about that. And it's hard. You're like, why? What did we just waste all that effort, and all that money and all those lives?
Yeah,
So
I was just reflecting on this idea, and I'm playing with it still, but I figure it fits since we're talking about this. I played with this idea that I think that again, you can change the numbers around a little bit. This isn't don't fact check me. 5% of people, let's say, are very evil. There's corrupt actors. They know what they're doing. They're conscious that they know what they're doing. The other 5% to me are the warriors. These are the people who are in the arena. They're shining their light. They see the corruption, they see the evildoers, whatever, and they are continuing to be that positive light. They're being
mm,
leaders. And then you have the 90% of people who are, the bread and circus, right? They're pulled into it, not bad or good, just people who are just, they'd rather follow. And recently I did a podcast and it was broken down that on the top 20% of that 90%, there are people who they see what's going on and they're hungry to enter. They agree. They're really the good, the heart and soul of America. And it's those people who are in that 5% who really, if they just double down and shining, they create more and more of those people in that 20% to join the ranks of those who really love this country and so on. And I really think that what I really took out of that is, yeah, there are bad actors, but if most of America really just woke up and really just said, "What can I do? Be the change that you want to see in the world," JFK kind of mentality, America would be right back where it's supposed to be. And I really think that we're on the precipice of that. I think people are awake. I see an awakening. Do you see that on your end as well?
I hope so, but I guess I lived in a world that was different, I'm like sounding like okay, boomer, right? But I've lived in a world that was like that, so
Yeah,
I've lived in that world, and I just don't know where that world is, and so maybe and I always do believe there's a pendulum that swings, and we are far out on one end now, but I do see like it's coming back, like I do feel like because there was a lot of people during the the COVID scare that were saying, "Hey, this something doesn't seem right. Something doesn't feel right. Like something, wait, tell me about these vaccines again. How did they get
yeah,
developed? And like how, like I watch commercials and I see like Umzempic with 37 side effects, right? But yet the one that you're giving me, there's no side effects. You're saying there's none, like how?
yeah,
It was just something smelled wrong, right? And I think there were a lot of people saying this isn't right, But the one thing that we need more than anything else, I think, is transparency. I think we need the fact that the government holds back on information and they just say do it or else. That's a real problem because when you're not transparent, then then the conspiracy people come out like, not giving us the full truth. So something else is happening. And so that creates a lot of the divide. So there's a group of people say, hey, CDC says wear a mask, we're going to wear a mask. And then the other guys are like, no, I've done my research. And, it says here, you're going to, you're going to get more germs if you wear a mask. And so it was never transparent, and I think they were withholding things a lot. And I think when you have same thing with leadership, if you withhold information and you're not transparent as a leader, people are like, what is he scheming? What is she doing? I don't like, I don't trust them. They're
yeah,
not giving us the truth, right? And so part of great leadership is transparency and being open and honest. Like the CDC say, we have never dealt with a pandemic like this at all, ever. We've never dealt with it. It seems to be airborne. We think that masks are probably going to work. So we really recommend that you wear a mask to protect yourself and others, right? And you're like, oh, okay, they're honest. They don't really know yet. And we plan on doing a study in the next 2 months, and we're going to tell you whether or not we think that's going to be an effective deterrent, right? That would have been transparency. But instead we get wear your mask or else, you go into a store and you got a big sign up, and and so you get the defiance, right? Like mandatory, you're making me wear a mask. Oh, let me show you, and or 80% of people just say, well, I just don't want to cause trouble. I'm just gonna put my mask
yeah,
on. I'm just gonna do my thing, So I think lack of transparency is a big part of a lot of what we saw over the past 3 or 4 years. And we still see it. I mean, we still see things being hidden. Um, I mean, this is just an example, and I don't want to get too political, but the whole thing with Nancy Pelosi's husband and what happened there, no transparency. Like it's all good, it's fine, nothing happened. Some guy attacked him with a hammer. Like, yeah, but what really happened? You're like, no, no, no. There's no body cam footage. There's no like, just okay. We're supposed to accept that. Um, what's
yeah. And there should be
Epstein? Epstein killed
responsibility.
himself, right? Epstein hung
Yeah,
himself. We all believe it. We're supposed to believe it. Like, no, something fishy's going on here. Where's the transparency? When we don't see transparency, we think that there's something going on, and
yeah,
maybe there's nothing going on, but the lack of transparency tells people something going on, So
yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think truth and transparency leads me to the last thing I wanted to talk about with you, which I'm actually not too familiar with you, is with what is your faith and what is your view on faith and what role does it have in your life, if any?
Yeah, no, I'm Christian. Yeah, I go to
Yeah,
church. I've been Christian most of my life. Yeah. So yeah, I've been going my wife and I go to church, both, our kids, we raised our kids in the church. And yeah, it's a big part of my life. I don't really wear it on my sleeve that much, because I do know that well, as a boss. Okay. So
Yeah.
one of the things I was trying not, I've always like people could tell I was a different kind of boss. Like I care deeply for the people that work for me. If their family dies and a family member die, I show up at the funeral. I'd pray for my employees, and but I wouldn't talk about it. I didn't want to push what I believed on my employees. I didn't feel that was fair, especially in corporate environment, right? Because I think it's just, that's not my job. My job is to run the business, get the maximum performance out of it. But I think my employees knew where I stood and the kind of character I was and where that came from. So yeah, I've been a Christian my whole life. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and that's really the trouble. And it's one of the things that I try to talk about on my podcast as best I can is that to follow Christ is to be Christ-like. It's not to take a Bible and hit people over the head with it. And there's a
Yeah.
quote that
Yeah.
stands out that says, it's some variation of this, but you read the scriptures daily, and in them you think you have life. There's nothing worse than a know-it-all. There's nothing worse than someone who's pushing that on other people. And I agree, but I also think at the same time, there's like a hunger for, uh, I guess that spirit of the father,
Yeah.
discipline, Jocko, David Goggins, right?
Yeah. People are
And
looking for it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of people are rejecting it. I to your point, we need more leaders who, because that's what leaders do, is they instill discipline without, do, be
Yeah.
disciplined, right? And lecturing people. Um,
Well,
so
I think that if we want to lead, if we want to be great leaders, we have to, I always say we got to lead ourselves first. And that means, physically, spiritually, mentally, financially, we've got to keep our house in order. It's really important because it's all about putting your mask on first so you can help other people. And I think that's part of what, you know, I've been an entrepreneur for 7 years. You want to say it's the hardest thing I've ever done is becoming an entrepreneur and leading a business for 7 years. But if it wasn't for my faith, if it wasn't for my physical health, if it wasn't for my mental strength, and I'm always pushing those things all the time, trying to get better in all those areas, I wouldn't be the leader I am today. I'm calm. I'm persistent. I'm focused. Sometimes inside I'm like, I have no idea how we're going to make payroll this month, right? I have no idea, but I'm going to pray about it, right? And I'm going to rest on that God has got a plan, right? And I'm going to work hard for whatever that plan is. But a lot of times I don't know. But I mean, isn't it great to have that faith that you can put it on and you're like, okay, I'm going to get that peace, right? That I need right now, right? Is like, I'm going to put that on you, God. I'm going to keep working on the rest of the stuff, right? And that's, I can tell you miracles in the past 7 years where like I had no money, then a customer makes a big payment. I'm like, I've got money. Don't know where that came from, but thank you. We'll keep moving.
yeah,
So the point is I think that you have to have something that you believe in. You have to have a faith that you believe in. And I think, um, it's interesting. I part of I'm taking my doctorate through Liberty University. So it's actually a Christian based a doctorate program. So we're studying biblical examples of leadership. So we
mm,
spent last semester, I read detailed. I can tell you everything about First and Second Kings right now. So all the kings and prophets and their leadership qualities and who did well, who did poorly. But it was really interesting. We studied leadership from looking at all these ancient kings of Israel, and it's just really interesting to see uh, the human nature hasn't changed. All the things that
yeah,
we think is new to this world that were happening in years ago, in these ancient kingdoms, which is really interesting. All the same affairs and worshiping false gods and murder and deceit and all that stuff was happening, and it's been happening over the years. So I think it's interesting. I think the Bible gives us some really interesting stories that we can learn about how to treat people,
yeah.
how to lead people. It's all there. There's many stories, great stories in the Bible for that.
Yeah, that simple truth of seek first the kingdom of God, and still people are not seeking, that kingdom of truth, which is within, right? Even to what you're talking about with leadership, people are again seeking the titles or seeking the validation or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever it may be. And the more you seek that, again, you might get it, but you're missing the point. The sin, and that's the whole idea of sin. So,
yeah.
um, where can people find your books? Where can people find your work?
Yeah, everything's on my website. It's johnsrennie.com. And I have links to my books, links to my podcast. links to all social media. I'm pretty active on Twitter, but I'm active on all the stuff. I even have TikTok out there, so I have someone helping me on that one though. So, but yeah, so I'm johnsrennie.com is everything I do, and you can find all the links in that website.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. Thank you for your service. Really appreciate talking with you.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.